A man in a worn-out spacesuit stood beneath the buzzing fluorescence of a New York subway platform. His helmet sat by his feet, and in his hands a polished violin gleamed like something from another world. His name was Luca Hart. The screech of incoming trains barely covered the first note he drew from the strings, an aching, otherworldly sound that bent the air around it. Commuters paused. Some recorded. Some laughed. A kid whispered, "Is he for real?" But Luca played on, eyes closed, bow dancing across the strings like he was conducting the stars. A battered amplifier hissed behind him, paper money fluttering in its open case. The camera of a tourist caught his face. Tears mixed with sweat, and a strange joy shimmered beneath the grime. He wasn't here for tips. He was here to be heard. Luca said, "You ever seen a launch from underground?" Then he struck a final chord so sharp it silenced the platform. Overhead, a deep rumble echoed, no one knew where from. The performance faded into a tense silence. Luca stood still, bow in hand, until the subway train roared past without stopping. No applause. Only murmurs. One woman said, "He's mad." Another muttered, "That was beautiful." Luca took a breath, nodded to no one in particular, and carefully packed his violin into a case marked with black stencils. Alv 1. On a bench behind him sat a metal canister, singed at the edges and leaking steam. He lifted it gently, like it was sacred, and slipped into the crowd. None of them noticed the ID badge pinned inside his suit, worn, faded, and from a company long thought defunct. Its logo, Polaris Aerosystems. Luca whispered to himself, "One day left." Above ground, Luca walked the streets with the canister hugged close to his chest. He moved with purpose, dodging pedestrians under neon signs and flickering street lamps. A gust of wind nearly knocked the helmet from his duffel bag. He caught it mid-air, then paused at an alley covered in chalked equations. This was his lab. A steel shipping container, wedged between buildings, buzzed with life. Inside, scattered tools, soldering smoke, wires dancing from car batteries. He set the canister down beside a tangled engine wrapped in foil and copper. Luca muttered, "Final calibrations, no room for error." He pressed a button. A hiss. The engine pulsed. He smiled, but it quickly faded. On his cracked tablet, an alert blinked red, "Access breach, files copied." Luca stared at the alert. His fingers hovered over the tablet screen as if hoping the message would vanish. "No, not now," he whispered. His mind raced. He yanked open a drawer and pulled out a torn folder labeled Thrust Sequence, Fee 3. Every page inside was water-stained and handwritten. Somewhere out there, someone had just taken his life's work. He tried to trace the IP ping, but it vanished behind proxies. That pitch, the demo, was it a trap? Luca fell into a metal chair, hands on his face. Flashbacks flared. The investor's smile, the sleek boardroom, the nodding executive with mirrored glasses. He punched the table, shaking his prototype. Then, resolve. They took it, so I'll take it back. Version 4 starts now. Outside, the city moved on without him. Luca sat by the entrance of his shipping container, watching taillights blur down the street. He lit a small camp stove, heating a dented can of soup. As it bubbled, he stared at the stars barely visible between skyscrapers. "Tomorrow," he said, "I fire it up. And then they'll know." He opened a small notebook, pages full of trajectories, engine cycles, and margin notes like, "Don't forget violin." A sketch of a rocket sat beside a quote. "They'll never believe you, so show them." He underlined it with his thumb. In the silence, he began to hum the melody he played earlier, soft and slow, as if trying to summon something from orbit. Luca's morning began with smoke. Something inside the propulsion core had shorted. Sparks hissed from the core housing, and Luca dove to cut the circuit before it could catch fire. "Not today," he muttered. Soot smeared across his cheek as he wiped sweat from his brow. His fingers trembled. He hadn't slept. The breach still gnawed at his gut. He opened his laptop and checked the net again. Nothing new. The files were gone, buried under encrypted layers, no trace of who took them. But then a post on a private aerospace forum caught his eye. Revolutionary hybrid pulse engine to debut at Skyreach Summit. Private demo. RSVP only. RSVP only. His jaw clenched. It was his design. Word for word. Luca whispered, "They're showing off my engine." A sharp laugh escaped him, bitter and breathless. "Fine. Then I'll show them what they missed." He grabbed a roll of copper filament and set the tools on the bench. His hands were steady now. Luca stood in line at the Skyreach Summit registration table. His patched-up spacesuit had been replaced by a borrowed blazer that didn't fit. A fake badge hung around his neck, lifted from a discarded prototype team's badge in a nearby coffee shop. Security barely glanced. Inside, the summit shimmered, massive displays of AI engines, next-gen satellites, and gleaming mock-ups of spacecraft. Luca walked through it like a ghost. Every banner twisted the knife deeper. The future is ours. Unlocking the next age. He found the demo room. The door was guarded. So he waited. A maintenance crew passed. Luca slipped behind them, pushed a cart, and entered the room unnoticed. The prototype stood under spotlights, polished, majestic and unmistakably his. Luca whispered, "They didn't even change the fuel ports." Luca crouched behind a curtain, watching engineers brag about the prototype. The CEO stepped up, smiling for the cameras. "Our team has innovated propulsion in ways never seen before," he declared. Luca's eyes narrowed. That man, Dominic Reese, had shaken his hand just weeks ago. Back then, Dominic said, "We believe in radical thinkers." Now he was stealing their work. Luca's mind burned. He remembered the room, the pitch, the handshake. All of it had been a setup. "They recorded everything," he whispered. The room applauded. Dominic posed beside the engine. Luca reached into his satchel, pulled out a small device, and whispered, "Let's see how secure your system is." With a press, the lights flickered. A blue screen flashed behind Dominic. "System test mode, remote interface initiated." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Luca smiled coldly. Round 1. Security swept through the room. Luca was already gone. In the shadows of the loading dock, he watched the prototype being wheeled back into a guarded truck. He recorded every second. "They're transporting it tonight," he said into a small recorder. "Route unknown. But I can guess." Luca returned to his lab with the footage, voice low and fast as he uploaded it to a hidden server. Timestamp, plate ID, sensor codes. He traced the truck's license to a depot on the outskirts, one he knew well. Years ago, he scavenged parts from its scrap heap. The irony made him grin. He opened a cabinet and pulled out a drone, patched and buzzing to life. "You took my code," he said, attaching a sensor tag. "Let's see how you like mine." The drone zipped over city rooftops, silent and fast. From his lab, Luca watched the live feed. The truck rolled down the highway, unaware. "Almost there," he muttered, guiding the drone closer. He switched to infrared. There it was, heat signatures glowing around the prototype. But then, the feed glitched. For a second, the drone froze. Luca's chest tightened. "Come on, don't do this to me." The screen cleared, showing guards opening the truck at the depot. They began scanning the prototype. Luca tapped a button. A hidden mic in the drone picked up. "Security sweep complete. No anomalies." Luca whispered, "That's what you think." He activated the sensor tag. Deep inside the prototype, a faint light blinked. The GPS locked. His target was marked. The countdown had begun. The depot was a fortress, surrounded by rusted fences, cameras on every pole, and roving guards with dogs. Luca parked his van 2 blocks away, staring through binoculars. he muttered. Still the same rust spots, same blind zones. Years ago he had worked there as a scrapper. Now he'd used that memory to break in. He pulled a folded schematic from the glove box, marked with grease pencil lines. 3 minutes inside, no mistakes. Night fell heavy. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Luca slung a duffel over his shoulder. Inside, disruptor coils, a signal scrambler, and his violin, because rituals mattered. He climbed the fence, rolled into the shadows, and disappeared. Lightning struck behind him, illuminating the prototype through the warehouse skylight. It waited in silence. So did he. Inside, the warehouse buzzed with low mechanical hums. Luca ducked behind stacked crates, moving fast and quiet. He plugged the signal scrambler into a junction box. Lights flickered, cameras blinked off. Window opened, he whispered. He moved through the dark toward the prototype, metal gleaming beneath tarps. Footsteps echoed. 2 guards. Luca slipped under a workbench as boots passed inches away. One guard said, "This engine's going on a private shuttle tomorrow." The other laughed. "Reese said he designed it in a week." "Yeah, right." Luca's hand gripped the violin case tighter. The hypocrisy didn't sting anymore. It fueled him. The guards passed. Luca rose, approached the prototype, and gently set the violin case beside it. "Let's begin the duet," he said, opening his tools. Luca removed the outer casing of the prototype, careful not to trigger alarms. Inside, it was exactly as he designed: burn sequence valves, nanothrusters, filament ignition rails. But something was off. A faint hum, deeper than the systems he built. He closed his eyes, listening. "No," he said under his breath. They integrated a satellite array. He traced the wiring, non-civilian grade, defense-level encryption. Panic flared. They weren't just stealing his tech. They were militarizing it. He connected a reader to the central hub and downloaded the core logs. One entry flashed: Skynet tracking protocol enabled. Luca yanked the drive. "They think they're building propulsion," he whispered. "But they're building surveillance." The sound of barking shattered the silence. Luca froze. "Dogs," he muttered. His signal jammer had worn off. Red lights blinked to life overhead. He stashed the drive into his coat and slammed the panel shut. Alarms began to whine. He ran. Footsteps thundered behind him. Luca slid beneath a half-closed gate, sprinted across the lot, and dove through a hole in the fence he'd cut earlier. A truck swerved in pursuit, headlights flooding the alley. He twisted, ducked into a drain tunnel, and vanished into black. Water rushed around his boots as he panted, clutching the drive. "They'll know I was there," he gasped. Good. Above, lightning cracked the sky again. But this time, he welcomed the chaos. Back in the lab, Luca collapsed onto the floor, soaked and shaking. He tossed his coat aside and plugged the drive into his offline terminal. Screens flared to life. Thousands of log files, debt frame, video feeds, government correspondence. A message thread blinked at the top. Deployment phase, July 10, Civil Monitoring Directive, active. Luca leaned forward. "They're turning my engine into an orbital surveillance weapon," he said. "Using it to track populations, not explore." He printed the top files, bundled them in a yellow folder, and wrote in black ink, "Stolen blueprints, built to watch, not fly." Then, he sent copies to every major journal, whistleblower forum, and news outlet he could access. One last upload. "For everyone watching," he said to the camera, "you're about to see what truth in orbit looks like." The story hit the feeds like a solar flare. Blogs, underground forums, and even mainstream media channels picked up Luca's leak gadal. Headlines exploded. Whistleblower unmasks weaponized space tech. Street musician exposes aerospace giant. But Luca didn't watch. He was too busy rewiring. The final build of his own prototype had begun. No more salvaged parts. Only what mattered. Thrust control and a message. He soldered late into the night, every movement fueled by purpose. A young journalist reached out with a single text. "Is it true?" Luca replied, "Come see." By morning she was standing in his lab, camera in hand, eyes wide at the chaos. "You're really going to launch this?" she asked. Luca nodded. "Tomorrow. They stole a weapon. I built a voice." The next morning, the world was watching. Journalists camped outside the depot. Dominic Reese stood before cameras, denying all. "These accusations are false. The individual is unstable, not credible." But something shifted. A senator demanded an inquiry. Protesters gathered with signs. "Science, not surveillance." Inside Luca's lab, the journalist streamed live. "This man," she said, panning to Luca, tightening bolts, "isn't just building a rocket. He's exposing a system." Luca said nothing. He only worked, eyes fixed, fingers steady. In the background, his violin leaned against a toolbox, untouched since the night in the subway. The journalist turned back to the camera. "He launches tonight." Luca pushed the launch platform to the edge of the city, a barren lot he once used for flight tests. Night fell. The rocket stood upright, small but gleaming, coated in thermal mesh and hand-painted stars. Around the perimeter, volunteers gathered, many who had once dismissed him. "Are you sure this will work?" one asked. Luca didn't look up. "It has to." He set the final coordinates. The payload wasn't a satellite or engine. It was a beacon, a live transmitter. Proof. But the crowd fell silent as he climbed onto a nearby truck and faced the camera. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about what they tried to hide. They turned silence into a weapon, so I built something louder." 10 seconds. Luca stood beside the launch button. The crowd behind him held their breath. His hands hovered, trembling. Thunder cracked above. In his mind, he heard his father's trumpet. "Ready," he whispered. Then pressed. Fire erupted beneath the rocket. The ground shook. Flames licked skyward. The crowd gasped, phones raised. Luca didn't move. His eyes tracked the rocket as it shot into the black, carrying his code, his data, his defiance. At 10,000 feet, the transmitter activated. All over the world, receivers blinked online. Streams opened. Screens lit up. The files played, unfiltered. Blueprints, voice memos. Surveillance logs. The truth soared in orbit. Chaos followed. Government channels scrambled. Polaris shares plummeted. Dominic Reese vanished from public view. But Luca didn't stay to gloat. He stood alone at the edge of the clearing, watching the stars. The journalist approached. "You're a hero to some, a criminal to others." Luca said, "I was just loud enough." She offered her phone. On the screen, clips of students cheering his launch, classrooms discussing the files. "What now?" she asked. Luca looked up. "Now I build something bigger, not just to launch, but to lift others." She smiled. "And the violin?" Luca picked it up, resting it beneath his chin. "Still plays." A soft note filled the night. Then another. Beneath the stars, a melody for truth. 2 weeks passed. The world debated Luca Hart. Some called him a visionary, others a vigilante, but none could deny what had changed. Satellite regulation hearings began. New whistleblower protections were introduced. Luca stayed quiet. He worked. In a new space, a former machine shop turned lab, he sketched the framework of something different. Not a missile. Not a weapon. A vessel for students. A dream. On his desk sat letters from kids around the world. "I want to build rockets like you. You made science feel human." One letter had a drawing, Luca floating in space, violin in hand. He pinned it to the wall. "This," he said, "is the launch pad that matters." Outside, construction hummed. Volunteers welded. Engineers he once rivaled now sought his insight. Redemption hadn't come in the form of glory, but purpose. The journalist returned, camera in hand. She walked through the buzzing workshop, capturing shots of youth teams assembling parts, debating designs. "So, this is your revenge?" she asked. Luca smiled. "No, this is legacy." He gestured toward a young girl, soldering with intense focus. "They don't need revenge. They need room." She followed him into a side room, walls lined with scrap material, and in the center, a new craft. Sleek, compact, and etched with the names of every student involved. "The first orbital classroom," Luca said. "We'll fly low and teach high." The journalist turned to him. "You really think it'll fly?" Luca laughed softly. "I don't know, but we'll learn on the way up." Word spread fast. Applications poured in from across continents. Kids with cardboard telescopes, soldered drones, and unshakable curiosity. Luca launched a foundation, Access Orbit, to fund their dreams. Scholarships, supplies, mentorship. The lab buzzed day and night. Meanwhile, Luca met with engineers he once viewed as untouchable. Some now asked him to consult. He agreed, but only on one condition: give back, one seat in every launch, reserved for someone who never thought they'd see the stars. Some scoffed. Some listened. One by one, the scoffers grew quiet. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was drawing a line in the sky. Dominic Reese finally resurfaced, on a shaky video feed during a live investigation hearing. His voice cracked, his tone defensive. It wasn't theft. It was collaboration. He presented ideas freely. The room of officials remained silent. Then came Luca's footage. The original pitch meeting. The copy-paste files. The timestamps. The silence broke into murmurs. The lead investigator said, "Mr. Reese, this appears to be deliberate appropriation." Dominic's mouth opened. No sound came out. Luca wasn't there to watch. He was walking a group of students through staging math. But the world watched. The courtroom echoed with the sound of a man losing everything he'd stolen. Luca returned to the subway. Not to play, but to listen. A boy, maybe 12, stood at the platform's edge with a plastic recorder, squeaking out a tune. No one paid him any mind. Luca watched, smiling. When the boy finished, Luca approached, placed something in the instrument case, a keycard. "What's this?" the boy asked. "A door," Luca said. "It opens a place where you'll belong." The train thundered past, wind tossing his coat. He turned and walked away, vanishing into the crowd. Behind him, the boy held up the keycard. On it, Access Orbit, Student Tier. Below that, in small letters, "Show us how loud you can dream." Launch day came again, but this time, it wasn't about protest. It was a lesson. The students gathered around Luca at the new desert site, wearing helmets too big for their heads and grins even wider. The craft sat on its frame, like a sleeping promise. "This isn't just a flight," Luca said, standing on a crate. "It's a statement. That brilliance doesn't need privilege to take off." One girl raised her hand. "And if it doesn't work?" Luca smiled. "Then we learn faster than anyone else." Class laughed. Then silence fell as the crew stepped back. Final checks. Luca looked to the control board. It wasn't his hand hovering over the button. It belonged to Amira, the 12-year-old solder expert. "When you're ready," Luca said. She nodded. This time, he watched from the sidelines. The engine roared like a lion coming alive. Dust kicked up in spirals. The students held onto each other, eyes wide with joy and disbelief. The rocket lifted slowly, then surged upward. Cheers erupted. One student screamed, "It's flying!" The onboard stream showed the view. Clouds shrinking, the earth bending, silence creeping in. In the lab, screens showed altitude, trajectory, and vitals, perfect. Luca exhaled. Amira looked at him, eyes shining. "We did it." Luca shook his head gently. "No, you did. The crowd behind them didn't see a rocket. They saw validation. Proof. The impossible had just become routine. Back on Earth, the data poured in. The craft hit orbit, deployed its payload, a simple satellite no larger than a lunchbox, built entirely by students. It blinked online and sent a message across all visible receivers. We built this. Together. Around the world, classrooms erupted. Teachers played the message. News anchors repeated the words. Access orbit became more than a foundation. It became a movement. Governments called. Investors offered support. But Luca refused most. No buyouts, no patents, open source or nothing, he said. A journalist later asked him, "Aren't you afraid they'll steal again?" He smiled. You can't steal what's already shared. Recognition followed, but Luca remained distant. He refused magazine covers. Skipped ceremonies. Instead, he spent days in the lab and nights under the stars, guiding teams, refining designs, answering messages from 1,000 dreamers. One evening, a group of students found him on the rooftop, violin in hand, playing softly. "Why don't you celebrate?" one asked. Luca played a low note. "Because I'm still building. We're just in orbit. I want us among the stars." They sat with him, silent, listening. The sky pulsed above them, satellites drifting, data flowing. And somewhere far beyond, their little beacons still blinked. Late one night, an old rival showed up, engineer Jenna Liu, once a critic, now curious. She toured the lab in silence, then said, "You've made something untouchable." Luca looked up from a circuit board. "Not untouchable, just unowned." Jenna studied a model rocket beside the blueprints. "What would it take to join you?" Luca stood, wiped his hands and smiled. "Leave your title, bring your hunger." She nodded. Outside, the new launch bay buzzed. More crafts. More classrooms. The line between student and teacher blurred. Luca watched it all, arms crossed, quiet pride blooming. The street musician had tuned the world to a different rhythm, and they were still playing. Years passed, and the Access Orbit fleet grew. 7 vessels, 50 nations, countless students. On the anniversary of the first flight, Luca stood on a launch pad again. This time he wasn't alone. A team of young astronauts surrounded him, graduates of the very program he'd once sketched in chalk on an alley wall. "This ship," he told them, "carries more than passengers. It carries possibility." Among them was Amira, now 18, suiting up for her first mission. She looked at Luca and said, "You started this with a violin." He smiled. "No. I started this when someone told me I couldn't." She nodded. "We're going to finish it." Engines hummed behind them. History was waiting. The ship rose slow and steady, slicing the atmosphere clean. Inside, Amira floated weightless, her eyes wide with wonder. She reached to the porthole, watching Earth spin beneath them. A tablet blinked with mission protocols, but she paused. "Luca," she said into the mic, "it's beautiful." Back on the ground, in a control room lit with soft blue light, Luca listened with quiet reverence. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. This was never about credit. It was about elevation. The comms officer whispered, "She's stabilizing orbit." Luca nodded. The room clapped softly. And in that moment he wasn't a rebel or a myth. He was a mentor watching stars ignite in someone else's sky. In orbit, the crew released a new module, an orbital classroom. Its panels unfolded like wings, revealing seats, screens, and a circular skylight. Students across Earth connected to it via VR and stream. Amira led a lesson on orbital mechanics, while her crewmates took readings and answered questions in real time. On Earth, kids gathered in gyms, rooftops, and classrooms to join. Luca watched from a quiet cafe, sipping tea, a weathered Access Orbit badge pinned to his collar. A man at the next table said, "That Luca guy, he was crazy." Luca smiled without turning. "Yeah, crazy enough to believe kids belong in space." That evening, Luca returned to the subway. The platform looked the same. Grimy tiles, flickering lights, the distant screech of trains. He opened his violin case and tuned the strings. A small crowd gathered. Not because they recognized him, but because the sound stopped them cold. He played softly, a melody full of ascent, silence, and spark. A child dropped a coin into the case. Another filmed. A woman whispered, "It's him." But Luca didn't acknowledge it. He just played. As the train passed behind him, a gust lifted his coat and a news ticker scrolled on a nearby monitor. "First student crew completes orbit." He smiled, then played the final note. Far above Earth, in the gentle quiet of orbit, Amira unlatched a compartment and retrieved something unexpected, a sealed case. Inside, a violin. Not new, not flawless, but historic. A small plaque read, "For when silence needs a soundtrack." She floated to the center of the module, strapped her feet in, and began to play. The notes drifted through the spacecraft like a story written in sound. Ow! Her crewmates paused, smiling. Cameras streamed the moment to Earth. Millions watched, breathless. Below, Luca looked up from the cafe window. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The music was enough. Final narration. They laughed at the street musician, until he showed them the stars dance to his tune.